All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take over and do segment 2 of this two-part video series about modern classification systems. We have already covered the domain bacteria, domain archaea, and domain eukarya in part 1 of this video series. And what I want to do is actually break down each of these domains a little bit further. As you can see, there's really only one kingdom under the domain bacteria, one kingdom under the domain archaea, and there's really four kingdoms under the domain Eukarya. And so this is really where a vast majority of the breaking down is going to come from. There's not going to be a lot of differentiation between the domain and the kingdom Eubacteria. Again, not a lot of differentiation between the domain Archaea and the kingdom Archaebacteria. This is where a vast majority, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. That's where the vast majority of the differentiation is going to come. Nonetheless, I will go through all 6 of the kingdoms. And if you have any questions as we travel throughout this, please feel free to email me. Please feel free to reach out during AAA. The first few minutes of class every day, you're welcome to ask questions. I'll provide clarity wherever needed. Without further ado, let's go. Kingdom Eubacteria, not a lot is going to change from the domain Eubacteria. One thing I do want to clarify, and I want to make sure that it is impressed upon you, is that eubacteria can be helpful. They are used not only in the production of yogurts, things like yeast are used to create breads and give them that light, fluffy, aerated texture, right? But a lot of vitamins and minerals that we see that are going to be found in the local grocery store, they're going to be produced through eubacteria. Now, we've spent a lot of time talking about strep throat, chlamydia, Lyme disease, E. coli, salmonella, right? All of those things still apply in the kingdom eubacteria, but they are of the negative variety. So I didn't want to continue to hound on the negative aspect of eubacteria. I do want to highlight some of the positive things that eubacteria bring to human life. Some characteristics related to eubacteria. They are single-celled organisms or unicellular, but they are complex in nature. We'll get more into that here in just a little bit. Some further details regarding the kingdom eubacteria. These are single-celled but complex organisms. They are capable of surviving in essentially anywhere in the world. They are the most abundant, right, in terms of population, and they are differentiated as a kingdom from archaea or Archaebacteria, which is an old term, because they have a very different chemical makeup. They have a different chemical structure as well. They require oxygen. And we're going to learn more about archaea or Archaebacteria and what makes them different at a kingdom level. So to put everything into perspective, we've talked a lot about this, especially today as we created the Venn diagrams. The kingdom Eubacteria is made up of unicellular organisms. They have a prokaryotic cell structure. There are some autotrophs and some heterotrophs. Mostly they are going to be autotrophs. And they reproduce through binary fission. We will now move on to the kingdom Archaea or Archaebacteria. Kingdom Archaea or Archaebacteria. Little backstory. In 1983, scientists took samples from a deep spot in the Pacific Ocean. There was molten rock, hot gases, and even minor amounts of lava flow. These boiled into the ocean and created Earth's new lithospheric crust. What they found was an abundance or a plethora of unicellular organisms within the samples. So this led to a discovery of not only are there bacteria, right, things like strep throat, things like Lyme disease, chlamydia, E. coli, salmonella, that require oxygen, but there's a different branch of a type of bacteria known as archaea that doesn't require oxygen. They actually require a different gas, methane. They are single-celled organisms. And much like the bacteria in the first kingdom, they're going to be unicellular. They're prokaryotic in their cell structure. There are many that are autotrophs, but some are heterotrophs, and they also use binary fission to reproduce. One of the key things that makes Eubacteria and Archaea different is where they're able to survive. And Archaebacteria can survive in the harsh environments that you see here: swamps, magma, lava pools, lava flows, deep sea vents, places like the Dead Sea, right, that have high concentrations of salt in the water. The Great Salt Lakes, or the Great Salt Lake, that also is been found to have archaea in it. And some archaea, as I said earlier, can thrive in these areas. They can repopulate, they can produce, they can grow, all those things that we first talked about in our first unit, and they do it all without the presence of oxygen. And that's what makes them unique. It's what makes them different from the first kingdom that we talked about, known as Eubacteria. Moving along, as you can see, we are now moving into the domain Eukarya. These are going to be eukaryotic. So that's going to change the cellular structure of these four kingdoms. These were single unicellular organisms. They were prokaryotic in nature. We've now moved into the kingdom Protista, which falls under the domain Eukarya, or is a eukaryotic structure. So let's learn a little more about kingdom Protista. As I said earlier, they are eukaryotic. They have that clearly defined set of cell organelles. You might have heard today in class, we talked about mitochondria, we talked about ribosomes, we talked about smooth endoplasmic reticulum, rough endoplasmic reticulum. We talked about a well-defined nucleus. And when you have a well-defined nucleus, you also have very condensed DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acids. And deoxyribonucleic acids are genetic material found within cells. A vast majority of protists are going to be unicellular. Mental reminder here that unicellular, the prefix uni, means single or one. So they are one-celled organisms. They are different from both eubacteria and archaea, or archaeabacteria, simply because they are considered complex cells. Whereas archaea and eubacteria are considered to be simple, single cellular organisms, protists are and can be, in many cases, unicellular, but they have complex cellular structure. So that's the differentiation, the ability to be complex versus simplistic. So a couple things that you may have heard of: protozoa and algae. Let me give you some further examples with images, and maybe those will help your further understanding. You have amoebas, you have parameciums, you have diatoms. Some differing protists here that you may have heard of, especially amoebas and parameciums. Those are usually early studies, elementary schoolish age, pretty common words, pretty common phrases, common things to study of the kingdom Protista. If not, that's okay as well. The biggest thing is that you need to know these are complex cellular structures versus the other two kingdoms we've already talked about, which are simple cellular structures. The kingdom fungi, we do want to spend a little time here. I'm assuming some of you could maybe come up with some examples of fungi just off the top of your head. Take a few seconds and see if you can come up with something. The most common example I hear for kingdom fungi is mushrooms, right? The mushrooms that you may find in the woods at or near a decaying log, or the mushrooms that you eat on your pizza, or that you find disgusting that somebody in your family eats on your pizza. Totally acceptable. Those are indeed fungi. They fall within the kingdom fungi. So what else can we say about the kingdom fungi? Well, for one, they're multicellular. For two, they're consisting of multiple complex cells. So that means they are multiple cells, more than one. They at one time were a part of the Plantae kingdom. However, fungi are not able to make their own food. As I told you in one of my examples earlier, you will typically find mushrooms at or near or on a decaying log in the forest. That is the reutilization of the carbon and the nitrogen found in the wood as it decays. And the fungi is a decomposer of that particular log. It utilizes the carbon and the nitrogen to its advantage for reproduction and growth. So that means you have fungi who cannot make their own food, but plants can. So that means fungi are going to be heterotrophs. As I said, most obtain their food from parts of plants that decay in soil. I use the example of logs in a forest, mushrooms growing at, on, or near those logs. You also have molds and mildews. Right? There are certain types of mold that you may find. Unfortunately, I hope this is not the case for any of you, but you may find molds in your home. If you have a high concentration or a high amount of humidity in the air in your home, especially during the winter months when heat is required, there are certain types of black mold that can form in your bathrooms. Those are actually very hazardous. They become airborne, right? And you should do what you can to rid your home of them as soon as possible. Mildews are also a type of fungi. And here's an image of what I was talking about, a log in the forest, how it is the mushrooms are utilizing the nutrients available in the forest, and you've got growth and reproduction of these fungi known as mushrooms on the forest floor. Our fifth kingdom is Plantae, or plants. I would assume that most of you know a vast majority about plants at this point. There are an estimated 250,000 species, which then makes the Plantae kingdom the second largest of the six kingdoms. They are multicellular, which means they have multiple cellular types, and they are complex in nature. Plants are autotrophs. As we've said, they make their own food. You should at this point know what an autotroph is. They utilize the process of photosynthesis. The intakes, right, or the reactants, if we're putting this into a chemical equation, are water, CO2, and sunlight. Those three inputs, or those three reactants, give you a product set of oxygen, O2, and C6H12O6, also known as glucose. More on the cellular, more on the photosynthesis equation later. Some examples of kingdom Plantae that you may find within the kingdom are flowering plants, roses, dandelions. You may also find daffodils, anything that you can think of, right? Mosses and ferns are also examples. Sunflowers are a good one. Pine trees. You may have a tassel fern in your front yard or in your landscaping. And you may also have sphagnum moss. The last and sixth kingdom is going to be Animalia. I'm assuming this is, most of you know, right, what Animalia is. You understand our cellular complex. If not, we're going to go into a lot more detail, so you'll be all right. This is the largest in terms of sheer numbers of species because there are over 1 million known species. These are complex cells. They are heterotrophs. We have to eat other complex organisms. We used the example when we were studying autotrophs versus heterotrophs of we eat things like chickens or chicken, beef, pork, lettuces, cabbages, beans, green beans, peas. All of those things are complex organisms that we have to nourish our organism or our body. One of the unique characteristics about Animalia is what's called symmetrical body organization. They have this. It's really difficult for me to explain, and I think the picture does a way better job than words. If you were to take a scalpel and cut each of these dashed lines that you see here on a butterfly, a ladybird, a bee, and a beetle, each half would be exactly the same. That's symmetrical body shape. If you look here at the ladybug or the ladybird, you would have 3 legs on each side. You would have the same exact number of spots, 3.5. You would have the same thing for the bee. You would have, I believe these are antennas. You would have 2 front legs, 1 back leg. You'd have 1 wing, and you'd have half of the body. That's what we call bilateral symmetry or symmetrical body shape. What I'd like you to do in your notebook as an additional assignment to watching this video and taking notes is to create a chart very similar to what you see here on my screen. I would like you to document 5 characteristics of each of the kingdoms. I want you to differentiate, much like we did here in class today with our compare and contrast study of eukaryotes and prokaryotes. I want you to document the differences between Eukaryotic, Archaebacteria, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Animalia. Each of the kingdoms has unique characteristics. I want you to take a few moments and highlight the differences within each kingdom. Again, I'm asking for 5 in each kingdom, and these will be due next Thursday, the day of your quiz, over domains and kingdoms. Again, I'd like to reiterate, if you have any further questions, if there's any understanding I can help you with, please see me at the beginning of the day, during AAA, at the beginning of your class. I would be glad to answer any and all questions. You can also email me. Enjoy the rest of your day.